passion for what he does. We have him right here with us this afternoon. Dr. Maurice Smith, and I ask that you put your hands together and help me welcome him as he comes to share with us.
Lady Walters, colleagues all, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here. I am in fact humbled. I thank you for extending the invitation and affording me the privilege of joining with you in your conference. I'm a little bit, I'm just getting over a bug, so forgive me if my throat is not what it ought to be, but I crave your indulgence. Before us today is an issue, I think, of utmost importance, and I will hasten to say these are my thoughts based on my considered research and analysis of the issue, and I can only be as authentic as my convictions allow. You may or you may not agree with me, and that's fine, because this is an academic exercise, and I'm with scholars, and so we have a right to create and form our own convictions. So having said that, let's jump right in. We're going to talk for the next couple of minutes about Industry 4.0 and the implications for education, both at the system and at the institutional level. And in doing that, we'll look at some numbers in terms of our labor forecasts. We'll look at what are the relevant and emerging 21st century industry skills. We'll look at some emerging occupations, and then I'll take you through some characteristics of 21st century learners, and you know these characteristics even better than I do, given what you do each day. And then we'll look at a model for education, and we'll land safely on some implications for us to consider. So we all know what Industry 4.0 represents, starting out with the focus on mechanization, and we're all the way now to the fourth revolution, which focuses on digitization. And time is going by so quickly. And moving on, we're going to be embarking on the fifth revolution. Now, there are particular forces at work, forces, variables, constructs, ideas, philosophies that are driving this regime. Number one, the whole matter of urbanization. There is a move afoot in several continents and countries across the world to have urban centers that are particularly defined. And it is interesting now because in my work in the Caribbean and the Middle East, I now have, I think, a greater, better appreciation of what it is that we're trying to do in Jamaica, and certainly how far we have come and really how much farther we have left to go. But one of the issues driving industry and digitization is the whole focus on setting up urban centers in which there are particular social services. And even in our context in Jamaica, there has been talk about extending the boundaries of Kingston. There has been talk about introducing new urban centers, new cities, if you will, and there are implications of what it is that we do as a sector. So that's one issue. Another issue has to do with demographics. People are living longer. Just sidebar, someone that I know or knew very well died suddenly. This is not related to the presentation, it just dropped into my spirit. And we were totally crushed. She was a teacher, just came down with cancer and just died, a matter of months. We went to the funeral, and the officiating pastor, who was her pastor and had been very close to her, when he rose to address the congregation, he said that when he gets to heaven, he's going to have a conversation with God. Because these are the words that he used. He says that he notices in his own experience that people who live good die first. and then the sketters, whatever that, tend to live longer, and the funeral erupted in laughter. So the truth is, people are living longer. Now, you know again that us men, we tend to go first. Yes? Some people may be happy about that. Others may not be so happy. But the population is aging. People are living longer. Another force is the issue of technology. And my, oh my, has this evolved. Can you imagine that in China, there is now being introduced a social credit system where there are about 200,000 cameras all across. And they're all connected, and at that nucleus, what these systems do is that they record what people say, they record what people do, they record even people's facial expressions. And having recorded those words and actions and facial expressions, each individual is then assigned a score. And like a credit score, well, you know what a credit score is, but this is a social credit score. So if you say something, if you are dissenting of a government position, you score low. And if somebody is talking with you, and that person is dissenting, and you are a part of the conversation, and you do not explicitly object, then you also get the same score that the individual has been assigned. And when you get to a certain number, that number determines whether or not you are allowed to travel overseas, whether or not you are allowed to get a passport, whether or not you are able to conduct particular transactions. So, and that's because technology has exploded leaps and bounds beyond our wildest imagination. We are not exempt from this in Jamaica. Right across the globe, there is a burgeoning of technology, and this will have far-reaching implications. So what it is that we do on a daily basis. Another issue is that of trade. That it really is how much money you are able to earn, and there is a thrust now to ensure that we, and rightfully so, reduce imports and expand on exports, because that's how a country earns foreign exchange. So these four huge forces are at work behind the scene, driving the changes in education as occasioned by Industry 4.0. Now, the geopolitics of it all is simply this. If you think about USMCA, the new agreement, US, Mexico, Canada, which has now replaced NAFTA, that has implications for us as a small country because we are a part of the Americas. And you would have heard from President Trump that his mantra is America first. Now, in addition to USMCA, the new NAFTA, is the fact that the World Bank, the president has just resigned, effective the end of January. You would have heard that. And there is a big talk now because other members of the bank, countries, have always been wary of the amount of power that the U.S. wields. So there are big issues now concerning the World Bank and the IMF. What will happen? Who will have the governing decision? Who will have greater say in the decisions that are made? Then we also have the Silk Road. Now, the Silk Road is China's ancient route of exporting goods and services across the continent of Asia, right through Africa, right through the Middle East. Now, given the privileges afforded me now, I'm able to see this. And when you go to the Eastern Caribbean, there is really not an island that I can think of in which there is not a strong, explicit Chinese presence. Jamaica is not excluded. There is the talk now that perhaps, although the Prime Minister did say that Spanish ought to be the second language, there are those who feel that we should also make Mandarin compulsory. So the Silk Road, and you know that China has an explicit strategy. There are examples in developing countries in Africa, in the continent of Africa. There are countries that owe China so much and are unable to repay their debt. And so what China now does is that they go in and they take ownership of airports and seaports. And it is strategic because all of these ports are connected to their exporting their goods because they are thinking about themselves first. Then you have Brexit. where Prime Minister May just lost a crucial vote today. That they have now 3 days in which to make particular decisions concerning whether or not the United Kingdom will in fact leave Brexit and how it will manage those processes. And her political life, her political career is in jeopardy. Then we have CARICOM. And might I just say that all of this, because the world is now operating in blocks, economic and trade blocks, and CARICOM is not exempt. Jamaica is the country in the Caribbean that benefits most from CARICOM, because when you look at the numbers, Jamaicans tend to operate in every country. We are the people who move the most among the smaller islands of the region. So were CARICOM to be dissolved, which it will not be, but were CARICOM to be dissolved, it is Jamaica who will lose the most. Keep in mind that we depend very heavily on remittances. Thank you. So geopolitics has to do with your location, your politics, and the impact of these two things on your international relations. So Jamaica has to operate within a wider context. And if truth be told, the world is not as big as it used to be. Now when I'm zipping across, sometimes there are no flights, and you would have heard Minister Bartlett talking about the number of flights that are coming into Kingston and Montego Bay. This is true of many countries across the world because people are traveling more and more. For the first time, Caribbean Airlines has reported a profit. Although access to the Eastern Caribbean is very difficult, and it is cheaper to fly from North America to London than it is from North America to the Caribbean. And it's very expensive to fly within the Caribbean itself. So people are traveling more and more and more. So there are all these forces at work. So Jamaica's location physically is of significant importance, but then also our location in terms of how we relate, how we interface with some of the bigger players, because we dare not take a dissenting stance against particular forces because of the economic implications that will redound. So this whole matter of multilateralism and our bilateral relationships with other countries. You would have heard, countries are important. You would have heard in yesterday's news the thing that the government wants to, by legislation, retake 49% of the stake that's owned by Venezuela. So whether we take yes or take no, whatever action we take, whether we take them back or we don't, whatever action there is will have a consequential effect because of the global community in which we live. It's a domino game. There are ripple effects. Now, at the very heart of these forces is this construct called capitalism. You know that capitalism is an economic system. It is not a political system. It is an economic system. And 80% of countries in the world support or operate an economic system that reflects a shape or form of capitalism. This is where some people own goods and services, and the rest of us who don't own those goods and services, we support those goods and services, and that's why the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. Now, you may not agree, but that's what capitalism is. That a select few make it to the top 10%. A select few. So if there's anyone in this room, and I'm sure they are, Zara, if there's anyone in this room that's among that 10%, please talk with me afterwards. I have some requests for 2019. But capitalism is a huge thing because this is where you have the power. People who have the power are people who have the talk. If you don't, it is fascinating to me that as a country, you can get a loan for a dance and a party and whatever else, but you can't get a loan to pay your school fee. It is absolutely fascinating. And it is also fascinating to me that countries, NCB and BNS and others, continue to report increasing profits, whilst at the same time reduce the interaction between themselves and their customers, charge all sorts of fees. You have to go through automation, so you have to call 15 times and be on hold for 15 minutes. Their staff members aren't getting increasing salaries, but yet each quarter, you hear that their profits are increasing. If you don't have the money, you don't have the talk. Think about when last week when Supreme Ventures was advertising for the winners of the $158.4 million lotto ticket. If you have that ticket in your car, go get it. Now, I understand, I don't know, I've never bought a lotto ticket. But if you have, you please school me. But I understand that when you win a lotto ticket, perhaps sometimes the government takes like up to 29 or 25% tax. Is that so? Or you know? So, now, so these forces are real, and these forces are perhaps not as explicit. They are far more subtle. Because we have been schooled and socialized to believe that goods that are imported are of superior quality. So there is a public education campaign afoot of which we are all victims that makes us feel that everything that comes to us is of superior quality and that which we produce is inferior. And the reason for that is to keep certain countries rich and certain countries poor. There is a political ploy behind who is determined to be a developed country vis-a-vis who is designated as a developing country. I've been to Malaysia twice. Malaysia is on track to become a developed country by 2020, next year. There is absolutely no comparison between, my opinion, which can be countered. There's absolutely no comparison between Malaysia, if you will, and Jamaica, because the differences are huge. There is a strategy afoot, especially when it comes on to the continent of Africa, to keep certain countries where they are. When you look on this chart here on your screen, you will notice that some countries are in red and there are two shades of green. The green says that there is high unemployment, which means that there are more people than there are jobs. And this is from the ILO. There are more people than there are jobs. And especially in India, to the far right of the screen, is a darker green, which means that there's a denser population there are far more people who need jobs than are the jobs available themselves. The countries in red are those who are experiencing a labor shortage, which means that jobs are there, but the employers can't find people who are particularly skilled to take on these jobs. It's not that the people aren't there, it's that the people are unemployed or underemployed. And when you look at the difference between the two, 56.5 million people in these countries that are in the green countries are available, but the shortage is 47 million. These are projections up to 2020. Now, in Jamaica, data coming from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. As of last year, we produced just about 35,000 students leaving secondary schools. 25% of them having attained 5 or more subjects, including math and English. And of course, there's no secret that the females are outperforming us. So these are the pass rates. The 2018 report is not yet ready from the Ministry of Labor. Business subjects, 86%, technical vocational subjects, 84%, arts, 66%, and the sciences, 55%. In terms of our post-secondary output, last year, 73,000 people left our post-secondary / tertiary institutions. 63% of them are females. Again, no surprise to the rest of us. And this is what they would have studied. Commercial jobs, cooks, waiters, etc., computing. The rest of data is unavailable. In terms of our tertiary output, 17,000 graduates. Again, just about 2/3 of them females. Some interesting data sets. Now, it is said right across the world that 70% of the jobs of people who are currently entering the workforce will be affected one way or the other by automation. I would have just referenced the point of the banks, where it's difficult for you to get through, and you are charged a fee to go to the bank to get your own money that they would have already rinsed, can I use that word, to earn their money. And what you call flow, I hope I'm not sued, when you call flow, and Digicel has gotten on board now, where everybody now, and in fact, one of the things I find most annoying is when you call some of these companies, like you call 1-800, and there is a person with a strong Indian accent online who can't understand what you're saying, and you can't understand what they're saying, and both persons leave frustrated and annoyed because automation is taking over. Entities are reducing the number of people they employ because the machines with artificial intelligence can do what we do. Interesting. So entry-level jobs are disappearing, and there is now a focus on skills. Now, I must confess, I think I had the greatest primary school teachers in the world. Because when I went to school as a little boy, there were 62 kids in the class. I've never been in a small class. And our focus was never on content. So I can boast because that's my experience. My teachers, I didn't know my teachers were humans. I didn't know they had sex. I didn't know they went to the bathroom. I really thought that they were little gods. Because school would start at 8:30, but we were instructed to arrive on the campus in class by 7:30. And when you got there for 7:30, there was work on the board. And to add insult to injury, they didn't mark it. They gave it to you and said, exchange your books. And that had to be done before 8:30. So that was in addition to the work that you had to do at 8:30. So when we were being taught, especially the rules of the language, and I say to people wherever I go, if at all I have a mastery of the language, it's because I had excellent teachers. Now when I listen to TVJ now and CNN, and they make many mistakes with the language, they massacre the language. So well was I taught that when they make a mistake, something goes off in my head. Because the way I was taught as a little boy, I had to know the rules of the language. I had to be able to conjugate the verb. And I didn't have to only know the rules, I had to be able to explain. So if it is that I gave an answer and the answer were correct, but my explanation of the rule were wrong, I wouldn't get credit. So you had to know the answer, you had to be able to compute to figure out how did you get to that point in the first place. So we were always taught skills. Now when you look at 2015, 4 years ago, boy, the time is going by so fast. 4 years ago, the top 10 skills are listed there for you. Creativity was ranked at number 10, and we've made our way all the way to complex problem solving at skill number 1. But 5 years beyond that, which is next year, you will notice that creativity has jumped from 10 to number 3. Complex problem solving remains at number 1. People management, which is less important than it was because less people will be involved in the transaction called work. So we have made some transitions. Some skills have become more important, some skills have become less important. These are the top 20 skills that digitization will require us to demonstrate. Now, you know that a skill is a proficiency. It's an ability to do something. And a cluster of skills is a competence. And then competencies, when put together, form capabilities. So if I hold a scalpel, that's a skill. If I'm able to cut and perform surgery, that's a competence. And if I can do that on several people and none of them dies, that's capability. So you cannot be deemed to be a capable individual unless you have proven your worth. So we have some issues, and I'm coming to all of that. We have some issues, some things to address, because not only are we to focus on skills and competencies, we are to ensure that our workforce is capable. And we have found ourselves in an era, and forgive my saying so, a dispensation of time where we are driven by numbers and not necessarily by a quality agenda. I will speak to that momentarily. 60%, it is said, of persons who are being trained now are being trained for jobs that will be non-existent in the short term. So here we go. In the 19th, 20th century, 20%, because you know, it happened to all of us. When we were going to school, if you were of a particular gifting, your teachers felt that you ought to have become a doctor and a lawyer. A teacher was never, yeah. Yes? Am I the only one? Yes? Yes? I had a teacher who told me how disappointed in me she was because she heard I had gone into teaching. I mean, it's ignorance, and I winked at it, but you know, in those days, people didn't see education as a sector in which the bright people went. If forgive my being pedantic. But 20% of us, because there was a status quo, there still is. Because people feel like if you are a doctor, a lawyer, a bank manager, and I could go on, then you suddenly assume a certain amount of social importance. And a similar level of importance is not ascribed to an individual who has a lesser perceived job. Yes? So people feel like the people who sweep the classrooms in our schools are lesser human beings than those of us who have degrees and are lettered. And sometimes we foolishly reinforce that divide. And if truth be told, it's not a matter of skill necessarily, it's just a matter of opportunity. But we were socialized, because if you think about where Jamaica is coming from, and education was for the children of the owners of slaves who went to traditional high schools, and the rest of us were exposed to a subservient kind of education that was offered by non-traditional high schools, and we still perpetuate that divide, because I could say to you in 2019, we have no traditional high school in Jamaica that operates a shift system. So that it may not be on paper, but that divide still exists. So we were schooled to believe that, you know, 20% of the population should go become professionals, and the rest of us should be merchants and office workers and physical laborers. My mother was an office worker and had the same job from the year I was born to the year she retired, which is 2012. Now, I have no choice but to commend her, because she did a lot with the little that she had. However, yes, I want to feel like a child with me, you know. But in 2019, if you announce to a group that you are in the same job for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, people think that something is wrong because you have no transferable skills. In the 21st century, note the shift. We are moving away from categories of workers, of employees, to be people being unqualified and temporary and seasonal, because we must have some people who are seasonal workers. We must have a group of people who are unqualified. Because not all of us is inclined to being educated. Well, let me use a better word. Not all of us are inclined to being schooled. That's a better word for this context. Because there's a huge difference between being educated and being schooled. And the challenge is many of us are being schooled, but we leave the education part out of it. Because you tell when someone's educated by virtue of how they behave and how they interact and how they live with people, not whether or not they pass an exam. Because if you think about it, most of the decisions in the world that are made by leaders of the world are made by people who went to Ivy League schools. Yet the quality of their livity The quality of their relationships is no better than some individuals who wouldn't have gone to a tertiary institution in the first place. So here we are making a shift. The paradigmatic shift is that we're focusing now on people who are unqualified vis-a-vis people who have greater taxonomic skills, people who are able to function at a higher level. Note, colleagues, on the 21st century, there is not a focus now on job categories. Because whether or not you are a shoemaker, in fact, I could say a shoemaker, a carpenter could earn a lot more money than the rest of us. And remember we said earlier, is if you don't have the money, you don't have the talk. Hello? That's the ethos, the capitalistic world that we're living. So your potency as a professional really is defined by your economics. So you mean to tell me that we're teaching for 20, 50, 40 years and we're retiring and we don't own a house? You mean to tell me that, but you know, we know people who leave colleges and they're buying cell phones and they can't string a sentence together, but they have the latest technology. In fact, the vendor woman, I have one school, and they were going to some New Year event, and their mother gave them $16,000, and they used it to buy a suit, and then they were asking me if I could give them $2,500 to pay for the ticket. And I had a good laugh. I think I offended them. I had a good laugh. Because I have never, God be my help, used $16,000 to pay for a suit. And I think I look good. So we have to a house. Money